goodness, have you ever felt the weight of guilt so heavy, just absolute remorse, that it makes you feel physically ill? I know I've been there. And that's where David is at today as we read Psalm 38. So I'm curious this morning, did you find yourself thinking, gosh, what on earth could David have done? Or why would the Lord's hand be on him so heavy that is describing his physical condition as one who has a disease? And he put some very descriptive words on this on this agony that he's in. And while it might be easy to go to think, deflect and think, gosh, what has David done? I know I found myself thinking this morning, oh, I have been there. I have felt such regret and such remorse, or just the heaviness of wondering when the shoe is going to drop because of something I've done, that physical weight and heaviness, the wondering of how how is this all going to play out, was just heavy on my mind. So this morning we read Psalm 38 together. And for those of you that have been reading one chapter a day with us, we this is not the first time we have heard David describe whatever he's walking through with such um such strong emotion, is how I would put that. But today is a little different in that, maybe we hear him being chased by those who are against him or oppose him. We've talked a little bit about the context of, in his younger years prior to becoming king of Israel, Saul was very jealous of David. And so we know David was on the run because Saul was hunting his life. But today's tone is very different. And while I don't know whether this is right after he committed adultery with Bathsheba, or when he had set Bathsheba's husband, his very good friend, at the front lines of war to only die, is he feeling the weight of that? Or is this with the dysfunction in his own family? His children had made really poor decisions, but also just sometimes, for those of us that have read his story in full, it might be easy to think, gosh, David, is this the consequences of your own terrible parenting? Whatever the case might be, there was a couple things that came to mind today. I'm excited to hear how the Lord spoke to you through his word today. When I look at Psalm 38, I think the verse that stood out to me the most today, we find in, okay, hold on one second. Um, Verse 11. So 38, verse 11, I'm going to read it to you. My loved ones and friends stay away, fearing my disease. Even my own family stands at a distance. Okay, so let me just put a little more context in this for you, because, you know, what we do know to be true is David actually didn't have an infectious, contagious disease. He didn't. He describes it as though that's what he has. So that would make sense if he was infectious, if he had a contagious sickness or disease, why his family and friends would not want to be near him. I mean, my goodness, just a handful of years ago, we were all quarantined because we were afraid, the government was afraid for us to pass this sickness of COVID around. It was very dangerous for a lot of people, and so the world was shut down, right? So that's understandable, the comparison to something that is very contagious, very detrimental to one's health, that one's friends and family would stay away. But let's dive a little deeper in that today, because when I read that, I thought, well, if this is just kind of David sharing how he's feeling, but not necessarily had a disease, why would his friends and family have stayed away? Why wouldn't the people he needed most in that time have been close? And there's a couple other instances in the Bible where this happens. For example, when Job was going through all his affliction, when he was going through what he was walking through, and we know that was not self that was not caused by his own doing, if you will. Um, but it was, if you will, something that we see a lot in the Bible because suffering, especially back then, was often seen as God's hand of discipline. And so when we look at the Old Testament, when someone experienced severe illness, calamity, or physical affliction in any way, people often assume that God was disciplining them. And obviously, Job's case was no different. In John 9, we actually see the disciples asking Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? It was almost as if they believed this man was blind, not just because he had a physical ailment, but because or a physical challenge. We know some people are born today with various handicaps, but that is not directly associated with discipline from God. Does that make sense? And so today's reading and that call out from David is a reminder of what sometimes we in our humanity often think of when we see people going through hard times. We think, oh, what have they done? How might they deserve that? And so social distancing would have been common back then. And so David's physical, suffering that he's describing is actually his guilt from sin. It's not enemies are attacking him, and yet he is experiencing the distance coming from friends and family. And so a lot of times it's important to remember sin creates isolation. So yes, he feels abandoned both spiritually from God and from his friends and family. So David's um description of that distance of God, that description of the distance from his friends and family is a reflection of him, y'all. It's not a reflection of them. And how many times when someone treats us poorly or maybe they're distant, do we think we've done something wrong? People's behaviors are a description of them, not us. And that's something we have a very hard time understanding as humans. Um, but, I'll say a week ago or so, I felt like the Lord was really highlighting the importance of confession and how healing and restorative confession is. And you know what? That's actually something that fits what we're talking about today with David. And that's what he's doing. His conviction is heavy, and maybe he hadn't confessed yet, but he definitely confesses today. He literally says, I want to point that out and I didn't highlight it. So darn it, bear with me here. Um, his descriptions here of how he's feeling is just very descriptive, and he does such a good job of really explaining to us what this feels like. He's on the verge of collapse, facing constant pain. But then he says, I confess my sins. I'm deeply sorry for what I've done. So whether that's his affair with Bathsheba, whether that is getting his own best friend, her husband, killed, make no mistake, um, his adultery with Bathsheba is bad enough, right? That's awful enough. But then the fact that it was his own best friend's wife that he had an affair with, ooh, that's even another level of guilt and remorse. And I love David just models for us today confession of sins. I am deeply sorry for what I have done. Yeah, that's what I heard today. Is just a reminder of when you make mistakes, when I make mistakes, when we do wrong, when we choose wrong, when we say things we shouldn't say, when we do things we shouldn't do, we should be quick to confess our sins, and not from a place of like, hey, we're forgiven. Hey, I want to make it all right because what I've done, whether it was intentional or very unintentional, whether we're really genuinely sorry or maybe we know we should be sorry, there's a difference. When we are genuinely sorry, we are genuinely remorseful. Y'all, I have things I've done that the minute I did them, immediately, I was so quick to be filled with guilt and remorse that I had to go make it right away. That's when I know there's been progress with where I am with the Lord. The biggest difference for me these days is catching myself before I do something wrong. I mean, sometimes it's even gossip. Maybe my kid tells me something in confidence, and then it's like, there's times I might share it because it's like I just want to prove I know something if I'm being true about my motives. Sometimes I share it out of genuine, oh, you know, pray for this, or I need help with this. And so sometimes it's truly out of a place of weakness and not a place of poor motives. But regardless, confession is the key here, to be able to relieve ourselves of the guilt and the consequences of sin. And so I love again what David models here for us. And I just have to say, y'all, it's easy to be the friends in the family like Job had, like the disciples were asking Jesus. And we say, well, what have they done? Or did they do something to deserve this? Regardless of whether they did something to deserve it or whether they did something or not, my prayer is that my first line of reaction is one of compassion and kindness. We just don't know what people are battling at home. And recently here in Florida, um, there is a mother who sadly brutally murdered her children, two children, and then turned and killed herself, committed suicide. And the thought of what must have been happening or going on that could have caused that, regardless, if one takeaway from that, a conversation we're having with our kids and with one another is just a reminder, because on the outside, people that did life with her never would have seen anything like that coming, never would have known she was suffering to the extent that she was suffering, that she could, in fact, kill both her third grader, her fifth grader, and then turn around and kill herself. Y'all, we just don't know what people are battling. We don't know what they're carrying. And so somebody coming in contact with David, I mean, for all we know, David was sitting in a pile of dirt, just feeling sorry for himself because he was felt so guilty and filled with grief and remorse for his behavior, that the reaction of the people around him might not have been judgment at all, but just might have been like, oh, what's going on there? Almost a feeling like they couldn't approach him. Regardless of what the reason was, what we're reading today is how David is feeling after sin. And so what a reminder of, sin looks good on the outside. It looks like it's going to fill us, fulfill us, bring us the joy or the feeling that we were hoping to have. But the reality is, let me just put it like this. Sin is very often like homemade cookies. You come in, you get that whiff of the fresh baked cookies. And so the minute they come out of the oven, you can't wait to partake in them. You can't wait to eat them. 2 cookies later, 3 cookies later, 4 cookies later, 6 cookies later, maybe every cookie that was just cooked later, you just feel bleh, ill. It doesn't give you the lasting effect you had hoped it would. Instead, it leaves you filled with regret. That is what David is sharing with us today. As you read this, try to pray into it and ask the Lord to reveal to you what you might not otherwise know. When I read the word, I often find myself asking the Lord to teach me something I might not otherwise know, reveal something in me that needs to be removed, that keeps me apart from Christ in ways that I just want to be closer to him. And today, David is certainly giving us a great perspective of what it's like to sin and carry the weight and the consequences of what sin does to us. And again, it might look like, well, why are his friends treating him like that? He's sick. He has an ailment. Well, quite frankly, the consequences of sin are like an ill effect, as if you have a disease. That is the reality of what sin does to us, even though the temptation of sin often looks like it's going to be so much better than it actually is. What a great reminder today of sin's effects on us and sin's effects in all our relationships as well. Not even the relationships that might have had a firsthand impact by the sin that you cause. At the end of the day, sin changes you and therefore changes every relationship you're involved in. And so, what is the key to sin? Well, first and foremost, confessing isn't going to remove all the consequences of sin necessarily, but it does put us in right standing with the Lord. And what Jesus did for us on the cross, make no mistake, just gives us a license to sin and do whatever we want. Y'all, there's still built in realities that sin causes, like distance between people we're close to, whether or not they were involved in the sin we committed or not. There is just natural consequences to sin, but there is hope. We do have hope. And when we fall short, and we all do, make no mistake, the word is very clear about that. We all fall short of the glory of God. But man, I'm so grateful that we have there is a plan. There is something we can turn to when we have fallen short, and that is the Lord. That is confession. That is just bearing ourselves humbly before the Lord, before the person we might have committed sin against, and asking and repenting and asking for their forgiveness. That is what has been modeled for us and can cure the remnants of what sin leaves, the wake it leaves. But man, this is just such a good verse to contemplate. I don't know that I have a clear word. I'm just reminded of the consequences of sin, and I'm reminded of how what the next right thing for us to do is when we have fallen prey to sin in our lives, when we have committed a sin, when we have done something that we have guilt and remorse for. And thank God we have guilt and remorse. That means our internal meter is working, because when it's not working, y'all, that is a very vivid picture of us being given over to our sins. Remember, the Lord does not force us to be in relationship with him. He does not force us to do what he asks us to do, but he does give us a way that will show how we can have peace and how we can live this side of heaven with peace and in good standing with him and with others. And yes, he has created a path to make it right when we do fall short, but that doesn't mean that that's going to come with no consequences. It just doesn't. And David does a really good job today of describing to us what life looks like when we give in to sin, the consequences of sin. And thankfully we do have things that we can do when that has happened, but man, I don't know if you're one of those hard learners. I'm one of those learners by doing, not those learners by hearing. And I wish so much I could hear someone tell something they did and the consequences of those decisions and then make better decisions myself. But shoo, I often have to be one of those that learns by doing myself, darn it. And so if you can be one of those that learns by seeing others walk through hard things, today's psalm is going to be great for you. For those of us that tend to need to go out and learn those hard lessons ourselves, y'all, this is what we have in store when we give in to sin. But thankfully, we have hope, and there is a plan to restore us. But I think we'd avoid a lot of hurt and heartache and just ick if we could avoid it in the first place. Happy Sunday. I hope you all have a good day. If you're in beautiful weather like I have the fortune of being in today, enjoy it. If you maybe don't have warm weather, but you've got some sun, get in the sun today and let that sun. It's just such a reminder that the Lord's mercies are new every day. And boy, don't we need them, because we are fiercely human. And I am just so grateful for a God who wants to walk with me daily in spite of me. Anyways, love y'all. Have a good day.